Too many capsuleers consider contemporary pilot licensure as a simple dichotomy. Although skill farms as we once knew them are a relic of the past, this has paved way for some interesting licensure opportunities for those willing to think outside of the box. In today's episode, we're going to break down what constitutes a pilot's license and examine a few ways in which we can play with some of these variables to tailor licensure to suit our particular needs. Access, capital, labor, utilization. These are what I consider to be the building blocks of the MMO licensure model. Access is CCP allowing you to play their game. Capital is the real-world currency spent to sustain a license. Labor is time spent grinding in-game currency to sustain a license. And utilization is how many of your licensure's benefits you actually took advantage of. Historically, in EVE, the arrangement of licensure was straightforward, really. You trade capital for access, aim to maximize utilization, and you don't really consider labor at all. But EVE is a very old game. A lot has changed in the industry since its release in 2003. In 2009, CCP realized something quite remarkable. If you give players the opportunity to abstract the aforementioned arrangement, you end up generating more revenue and bringing in more players. In 2016, the Alpha clone was conceived, and by 2017, Plex was further abstracted into 500 units per license. Players can now trade licenses in piecemeal. Almost shockingly, the downside to these revelations was minimal, certainly being far outweighed by the positives. But I encourage you to not take my word for it. There is a reason why virtually every other MMO, including juggernauts like World of Warcraft and RuneScape, have mimicked this exact business model. And to be clear, this is where it started, right here, in CCP's lab in New Eden. This model really works. By letting a player pay for a stranger's licensure in exchange for in-game goods, you effectively legalize and can begin regulating real-world trading, which is generally considered to be a bad thing. And we know that when you legalize something that's been prohibited, the black market analog to that industry faces pressure like never before, while the layman generally benefits. Understanding this, we are left with a system where capsuleers can choose to remain unlicensed but heavily restricted, fully licensed paying real-world currency, and fully licensed paying with in-game currency. These three distinct clone states are known as Alpha, Omega, and unofficially, PLEXing. But all this is common knowledge. The purpose, in fact, of this discussion is not to teach you what Alpha and Omega is, it is to analyze them, understand what they are, and use them to craft a fourth, hidden clone state, and indeed open up the door for even more in the future. The two official clone states are Alpha and Omega. These clone states are how the majority of capsuleers license their accounts. Omega is a simple solution to a simple problem, one that in a world of subscriptions for everything makes complete sense. You pay real-world currency every month or in bulk, and you get a license. Then the items and currency that you earn in-game are collected and spent on items and goods that benefit you. The entire time you are training skills, grouping up, and enjoying everything that the game has to offer. This is the de facto way to play EVE, and it is so for a good reason. Being an Omega clone gives you the least to think about, and assuming real-world currency isn't a concern, provides for arguably the most pleasant experience in New Eden. Omega clones require capital for licensure, but let you fully utilize your license and require no additional labor. Alpha, on the other hand, is a largely misconceived clone state. Indeed, it was advertised and is perceived as something of a trial account. I assert that this is selling the alpha clone state short. Alphas have a number of significant progress goals that they can shoot towards. They are fully permitted to play in groups and can and do have a wonderful time in New Eden on a day-to-day basis. But of course, skills and ships are heavily restricted in this clone state. But all the loot you earn in-game is completely yours, and you can use it to buy things like daily alpha injectors and almost have a alpha-specific progress track. I assert that the alpha clone state is a full experience where the restrictions are not limiting but interesting on their own merits, not unlike the free-to-play challenge modes of other games or the Smurf accounts of WoW, which create fascinating gameplay loops that you would never see with a, quote, real or Omega account. Alpha clones are a valid clone state. They are not just a trial. And it's probably better to remember that you can always fall back on that. Alpha clones do not receive full licensure and therefore can't fully utilize their license. But they also require zero capital and no labor at all to sustain. As we all know, the third main way that pilots pay for licenses is by purchasing PLEX with in-game currency and using that PLEX to purchase a license. This is known as PLEXing your account, and I argue that this is the third unofficial clone state. Plexers face a different set of rules than Omega and Alpha players. Unlike Omega players, Plexers don't have to pay real-world currency for their license. Unlike Alpha players, Plexers are not restricted to specific holes and items. However, unlike both of the official clone states, Plexers also lose billions a month of their income in order to pay for the Plex itself. This means that Plexers have a high labor cost. They need to constantly earn in-game currency if they want to keep extending their license. Another aspect of plexing that is important to note is that a lot of capsuleers misunderstand what exactly is happening within the game's economy whenever somebody plexes. Many capsuleers think that plexers aren't supporting the game or don't contribute, and I am here to tell you that this is false. We only really need to consider one fact to reach that conclusion. When Plex enters the game, real money was paid for it. So when you're buying Plex off of another person, CCP has already received the money for it. You just have to understand that one little fact. And once you get that, you'll realize that every time a player plexes their account, CCP was already paid in advance. They were paid for that specific plexing. What the plexer did was trade their labor for someone else's money. Same amount of money, different distribution. Plexers do not require capital for full licensure and still let you fully utilize that license, but have high labor requirements. But we're not here to talk about basic clone states or even the unofficial ones like plexing, are we? We're here to discuss the idea of a fourth clone state, an untalked about clone state, a misunderstood clone state. And what is it? Well, in order to wrap our heads around this, we're going to need a bit of backgrounding on something known as skill farming, something you've probably heard of. In 2016, CCP introduced yet another component to the licensure ecosystem with the unveiling of skill extractors and skill injectors. The premise for this introduction was simple. Use an extractor to remove skill points from one character, and it'll give you an injector. If you use that injector on yet another capsuleer, you're left with a scenario where you're now transferring skill points between characters, with some notable restrictions that don't really tie into this conversation, but are relevant if you choose to use these things. Skill farming worked in essence by using specialized characters with +5 implants to train skills that were destined to be extracted, which would then be sold on the market. Done properly, capsuleers could fit out accounts with 3 skill farming characters, assuming multiple character training certificates were used, and generate a profit well over the top of the combined licensure cost. Naturally, this could be and absolutely was scaled to extreme numbers, as EVE players tend to do. Also, as EVE players tend to do, the industry was killed by too many people doing it. Over the years, the profit for skill farming was driven down and down and down and down, leaving us in the scenario we face now, where it is no longer considered profitable to skill farm. This is important, and I contend that this equilibrium is really healthy for the game and kind of allows us to think in the way that we're about to. So we know that it's not worth it to exclusively skill farm anymore, at least not in the way it once was, because you can't make insane profits and, you know, everything's going up and everything's going down, and it's just, you can't squeeze money out of SP like you used to. But what if we package this entire idea another way? What if instead of skill farming for profit with elaborate setups and really just planned business, we simply scratched the surface and heavily subsidized ourselves in exchange for paused progress? Indeed, this is what I'm referring to when I use the term gamma clone state. The effective freezing of your skill queue by selling off SP to heavily subsidize your pilot licensure. Let me walk you through exactly what it is that I do to help you better understand this. It's important for you to first understand that my situation as an EVE partner / content creator or something is not something that is easily recreated, but being honest about my situation is a way for me to drive the point home and get your imagination flowing. So I have 4 accounts, and because I'm an EVE partner, I am generously given the equivalent of 2 accounts worth of subsidies per month. That means that for 2 accounts, I don't necessarily have to pay for them. If I throw some rough napkin math at you and tell you that skill farming generates something like half of a license fee per month, we're left with a really interesting picture. If I decide to pause skill training progress on all 4 of my accounts, I can flip those skill farms on and play completely free. Now, for a player that doesn't make and benefit from generating content and is not part of a partner program, which is exclusive and potentially hard to get into, it requires a bit of lottery luck, etc., this picture looks totally different. But the idea is very similar. You have the choice to, right now, buy some +5 implants on your trader or hauler, remap their attributes to a skill with a long training time, and simply continually sell off the skill points generated by this training queue by extracting and selling the injector on the market. What this does for you is simple. It basically cuts the price of Omega in half, but means you won't be able to train any new skills. Or does it? This is fascinating to me, and this is why this idea is so alluring to me. As a gamma clone, you really value things like daily SP rewards and daily challenges and event SP. You can stack this stuff up and make progress even when your skill queue is totally paused. It's just really slow. You can also flip off the farms at any point and train as normal whenever is convenient. You can even pool up injectors and instead of selling them for profit, possibly use them if you need them. I don't recommend that last one, but you can do it. Just keep in mind that there's a lot of lossiness involved with using injectors, okay? Gamma clones require no capital for a license, but offer only partial utilization and require a half unit of labor because you're not going to be training skills, right? You're not fully utilizing your account. The point of this discussion was not to convince you to drop what you're doing and become a Gamma clone right away to save a quick buck and to, try to play a little bit cheaper. It's not to preach that Omega is crucial, and it's definitely not to assert that Alpha isn't a more simple experience. Instead, this premise is more optimistic. I want capsuleers of all variety to understand that there are multiple ways to play this game. For those living in places where the economy maybe isn't too strong or it's tough to get a job, the concept of paying a significant amount of real-world currency for a game, it's simply out of the question. The idea that you can play around with the levers of pilot licensure might be more than a convenience for these people. It might be the only dang way that they can play. And I want them to play. I believe that due to how the system is implemented, being an Omega clone, a Plexer, a Gamma clone, these all contribute exactly the same. Every time you resub or relicense yourself, CCP is getting the money they need to keep the game going. Alpha players, while they're not contributing in exactly the same way, honestly, they are still a huge positive for the game in my opinion. Because we need players out there. This is a common complaint you hear. The more players in the game, the better the galaxies, and Alpha players contribute to that in a big way. Perhaps, if you struggle to Plex every month, you could consider a Gamma clone arrangement. Or maybe if you're an Omega clone with all the skills you would ever need, you could pause the queue and stack up injectors, not fully going Gamma clone, but borrowing the concept. Or lastly, maybe you're an Alpha clone who dreams of saving up those billions and going Omega. Now you have a middle ground. Now you can go Omega and get half your money back, if you play your cards right. The most important thing to take away is that the idea that clone states are not rigid. We can shift between them. You'd be shocked at how much fun someone can have on an Alpha account, and sometimes going Alpha reduces our tolerance to Omega in the sense that it makes it more fun. For normal players, the concept of pausing your skill queue is unfathomable. But I've come to find that we often just plod away at training skills and never really think about what it would be like to be satisfied in what we know now. The Gamma clone state helps you come to terms with that, but it ultimately does limit your ability to progress. That's why I switch between Plexing, Omega, and Gamma clone states as I see fit. Some months I want progress, others sustainability, and others yet I want to do everything all at once at the expense of labor. Ultimately, there is no beating around the bush here. The cost of an EVE license is significant for many capsuleers. I hope to demonstrate that playing EVE isn't as simple as I'm a subscriber or I'm a trial account. Indeed, there is a place for everyone out there, as long as you understand the factors at play when it comes to licensure. Don't be afraid to use the Alpha clone state to test out other options over time. I suspect that with enough trial and error, you will find a clone state arrangement that works perfect for you. And for those who happily stick in the Omega clone state, I just ask you to not be so quick to denigrate those who choose other methods. These capsuleers are every bit as valuable as you are, and whether or not you admit it, you benefit from their presence.